austerity.
Yeah.
Wow. He's tired.
That's right. Well, I think I'll defer the question of the environment to Clive, because this is something he's worked on quite extensively. So he came up together with Colin Kirkpatrick with a methodology to assess, among other things, the sustainability impact of trade agreements. So I'll defer to the climate questions to him. But more generally, what I'm going to talk a little bit about is ISDS, because it sort of pertains to a number of the questions that were raised. The fear is, for example, that if there was an ISDS mechanism in TTIP that might, allow companies to overturn fracking or challenge fracking dams, because you can't technically, a government doesn't, ISDS just forces a government to pay compensation, but of course, there's all sorts of issues with that as well. But the problem is, that the ISDS mechanisms, even though it is true, I'll concede this to David, they are an improvement on what currently exists, and a lot of the current ISDS mechanisms that exist that have been signed between the UK and other governments, there's very little exceptions for, what are called public policy interest exemptions. And the proceedings are not transparent, they're held in secret, whereas there is some movement towards just ensuring more of a carve-out for regulation in these in the ISDS, or at least how it's being envisaged currently in TTIP. But there's still a number of problems. I'd say two problems essentially. One is that the system, even if you make it more transparent, suffers from a structural bias insofar as the arbitrators have an interest in repeat custom. And of course, who's going to bring the repeat custom? It's going to be businesses that bring the repeat custom, because they operate on a sort of retainer basis. They're not sort of like our lawyers, tenured and have a secure position and are paid by the state, which arguably is independent. These are people that are basically corporate lawyers that depend on businesses bringing repeat custom to their courts, right? And they can often operate as both advocates and judges in obviously not the same case, but in different and potentially linked cases, right? So there's a big problem there. Some of these issues are being addressed, but the broader structural problem of having a system which depends on repeat custom isn't being addressed. So that's the first problem. And second of all, it's a matter of principle. Should we have a system in place which basically privileges foreign investors, over the state's regulatory, capacity. Whatever you could criticize about the British government and so on, at least in a sense it has to be responsive to the electorate to a degree. Whereas these corporate lawyers, in a sense, as we've said earlier, are responsive to particular interests more than others, right? To put it mildly. So that's part of the problem. And so it's interesting actually that trade policy is being presented increasingly. This goes back to the question from the Portuguese gentleman in the back. He's talking about Portugal as a country that's been riven by austerity, and the Portuguese government is very much in favour of TTIP because it sees it as a way out of austerity, a way of generating growth without stretching the public purse. And so it's quite problematic given the deregulatory bias, given the sort of bias in these ISDS tribunals. Yeah, I'll leave it there, and I'll hand over to Clive.
To Clive, and then David can come back.
Yeah, okay, great. I'll see if I can make this machine work. Can you hear me in the back? Yeah, jolly good. Okay. So on this question of environmental assessments and sustainability assessments, are they any more than just ticking the boxes? There are quite a lot of different structures of different impact assessment systems in different countries, in different jurisdictions, like the Commission for different things. And I think you've got a fairly valid criticism, perhaps, in saying, yeah, they're just tick box exercises for some cases, and rather less so for others. It's an interesting fact that for trade agreements, the European Commission actually operates two completely distinct impact assessment processes. The first of those is part of the decision-making process, and it applies to all the new directives that come out of the European Commission, all parts of Europe's decision-making process. And they do have to present an impact assessment in order to get to approval for it. It is in some cases, and particularly in the case of trade agreements, that is quite a superficial affair. And so you don't get anything very interesting in those at all. The sustainability impact assessments that we got involved in here in Manchester University are a different beast altogether. They were actually started by Pascal Lamy when he was the head of trade in Europe way back. And it was specifically in response to all the opposition from people like yourselves for those Seattle proposals. And Those initial studies and all the other ones that have been done under that framework do go into these things in quite significant depth. I am a bit critical of some of the things that have been done by what we did ourselves and what other people did as well, but on the whole, I think you'll find some darn good stuff in there. On the whole. But the key factor there, the question you asked, does it actually make any difference in the decision-making process? We actually did a bit of research on that, just goes back 4 or 5 years now, I suppose, and the answer was very, very, very nearly no. So it's not a formal part of decision-making, it's a process they have to go through. The only area where we were identifying quite a significant influence that those impact assessments had on the decision-making process was thanks to people like you. So it wasn't that we were feeding all this stuff into the European Commission saying this is what you need to do. It was out there in the public domain. People like yourselves were digging into it, reading the reports and coming up with things that you use in your pressurisation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Clive. David, I'll give you a chance to come back at any point. You have only 1 minute.
Very quickly to the Portuguese gentleman, Portuguese government is a big supporter of ISDS as well. And just a little fact. Permanent low-wage economy, I think that was really the biggest question. Is this going to lead to a permanent low-wage economy? Well, in the vision that both parties are setting forward, no. But if you are, suddenly expecting that the US or the EU is going to be able to make the US sign up for much better labour standards, we would find it hard to believe that. Although, having said which, the US does include labour provisions in all of its recent trade agreements, and they are technically enforceable. So there's a sorry.
But not enforced.
Well,
yeah.
They are technically enforceable by the EU. If we sign a trade agreement with the US, technically we can enforce it to the US. That's just a thought. That's it.
Okay, finally.
Okay, so certainly you might. I'd be interested to know what you think, but I haven't heard credible evidence discussed tonight that demonstrates either the growth claims of this deal, the jobs claims that SMEs would benefit, or anything about sustainability impact assessments. And I've also not had very concrete reassurances on the impact on public services, on climate change, on labour standards, or indeed on ISDS. Part of that is because we cannot see the text. We do not know the detail, and that has to be an urgent call to our elected representatives to help us get access for that. This is why, at this stage, we should not support this deal. And I urge you to go away from this meeting and make these concerns known to your MPs and your MEPs, because at the moment they are the people who have the most chance to raise these concerns and stop the deal. Thank you very much.
I'm not just using my position as organiser to make a final point, but I just wanted to finish off by thanking Michael, Polly, Clive and David for coming here and giving a talk. So if you'll join me in thanking them again. It's rare that, I think this is something we were commenting over dinner, it's often rare in a polarised debate like this to have, both sides, sitting in the same panel, and that's great. It's really encouraged debate, and that's really what we want. Unfortunately, we have to end slightly early because Clive and Polly, the taxi, I've just gotten a call, is waiting outside. They have to, unfortunately, catch a train at 15:15 from Piccadilly Station, so we don't want to risk it. But just let me finish off by thanking as well the organisers of Policy Week for hosting this event. Just to tell you that there are a number of other Policy Manchester events, all of which are free. Am I correct in saying that? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes, they are all free. And if you're more interested in TTIP, please get in touch with all of us. I think our email addresses are available. If not, I think most of us are on Twitter. And if not, just email me, and I'm happy to share, my work, other people's work on TTIP, and we can keep the discussion going. But thank you very much for coming. Thank you. So,